So now that we've calculated the world delta, which is how far it has moved since the previous frame, we want to convert this to how far would it move in 1 full second, which is going to be the velocity. So to do that, what we're going to do is just make some room after the set previous world transform node. So move the return node out to the right. And then we're going to drag in the world delta and do get world delta. And we're going to drop down the value, and we're just going to work with the translation. So how far has it moved since the last update? So to convert it from how far it moved from the last update into how far would it move in 1 second, we need to know how long ago the last update was. So we want to know how much time has passed between the previous update, where we actually saved the previous value, and now in this frame where we've calculated the difference between the previous world and the current world transform. So to do that, we take the translation and we're going to divide it. So search for divide. And we're going to divide it by the delta time. Now, the delta time is how much time has passed since the previous update. So we can right click and search for delta time. And you'll see under animation, delta time, click on that. So what we want to do is divide the world delta by this value, but you'll see this divide node is asking for a vector because we're doing a vector division here. But if we just plug in the delta time result, which is a float value, into this vector, it will automatically convert it from a float to a vector. So essentially, if this was 0.01, it would be inputting 0.01 on X, Y, and Z. Now we're going to save this result as the calculated velocity. So to do that, let's create a new variable, and we're going to set it to a vector. And just so the engine doesn't crash, which it sometimes can do, just compile and save before renaming the variable. And we're going to rename this to calculated velocity. And after we rename it, let's just compile and save. And we're going to drag in the calculated velocity variable, choose set calculated velocity, connect that up in the execution paths. And the result from this divide node is going to be plugged into the value. And then we're going to do compile and save. Now we're going to try to visualize this calculated velocity to make sure that it's actually working. So to do that, we can do a very simple draw line. So right click anywhere and search for draw line. And we're going to place this node between the set calculated velocity and the return node. So we hook up the execution path. And we're going to draw a line between A, which is 0. So this is in rig space. It's going to be exactly where the character position is. So it's 0, 0, 0 relative to the character. And B is going to be this vector. So this vector is the same as what we've saved as calculated velocity. So if you'd prefer, you could drag in calculated velocity and do get calculated velocity, or you could connect it up from here. But either way, we're going to connect that to B. And this should be drawing a line which goes from where the character is to this value, which is going to be somewhere away from the character depending on the direction of movement. So it should represent their velocity. So let's set some thickness to this line. So for example, I'm going to do 2. And if you drop down the color, you can see it's set to red, 1, 0, 0, and then 1 for the alpha. So we can leave it like that. And we're going to compile and save. But we're not going to see anything in this viewport because the character's not moving. So go back to the test level where you dragged in the character. And firstly, I'll show you what happens before we enable the visualizing debug commands. If we press simulate and we click on the character and move him around or try to move him, nothing happens. So what we need to do is press the console key, and you'll see down here the console highlights. And we're going to type a.animnode.controlrig.debug and then space 1. And depending on what engine version you're using, if you're using 5.3 or greater, you'll also need to enter this command, which is controlrig.enable draw interface in-game space 1. But that doesn't apply for this version of the project because I'm using 5.2. But if you're in 5.3, you'll also need to enable that to be able to see the debug drawings in game. So now if we press simulate, and once again, I have set this to simulate, not play. And to do that, you click on the 3 dots and click simulate. And now it's simulating. And if we click on the character, and if you press W to go to the movement mode, you should be able to click and drag to move the character around. And it may not be too visible from the video, but this is drawing a red line in the direction that I'm dragging the character. So we can see that our calculated velocity is actually calculating correctly, and it's pointing in the direction that we move the character.